Hey there, Alex Kidman, and it felt like it was time for another EV road trip. In this case, I'm heading to Tasmania. And while I'm aware that people have driven EVs around Tasmania for years now, of course, I am doing this largely because I want to, but also I'm doing this video to cover off the process of getting an EV onto the Spirit of Tasmania ferry, because there's some slightly different rules for EVs on that ferry than there are for fuel cars. And I couldn't really see a whole bunch of videos that covered this topic, so I thought it could be useful for people to see what the process is like, and, you know, I'm curious to discover it myself. But first of all, I'm in Sydney, and the ferry leaves from Geelong, so I'd better hit the road. Sydney to Geelong is quite a long way, but that does give me time to go over what the Spirit of Tasmania specifically says about EVs and what its rules are. And they're pretty simple, really. You have to declare your particular car type and model, but then you've got to do that for any car. They want to know about weights and measurements and so on. This is no different. You're just declaring that it's an EV, really, and that your car has, and I quote, sufficient charge to embark and disembark the vessel. You're not allowed to charge the car while on board. In fact, you're not even allowed down on the car decks during the trip anyway, so I don't know how you do that. And they state that EVs will be loaded onto specific decks and spaces reserved for EVs. More on that later. Additionally, they reserve the right to refuse an EV that has an indicated battery fault or that has been involved in a collision. And look, that makes sense. While the actual risks of EV vehicle fires are often grossly overstated, and I'm sure I'll get a few watchers rolling out the usual tired firebomb lines. Maybe step away from Sky News for a second or two there, fella. The realities of lithium-ion battery fires are not trivial at all. So that's what they say. We're nearly there in super compressed time, of course, because we are talking 930 kilometres and change to get there from Sydney to Geelong. And a real-time video would be a rather longer video. But what happened when we turned up? Well, let's see. You cannot miss the approach to the Spirit of Tasmania dock in Geelong. It's all very nicely labelled, very nicely laid out, very obvious where you need to go to start. What will probably be a lengthy bit of queuing, but we're nearly there. It's been a long drive. And we made it, or at least we made it to the pre-boarding bit. Been put in a separate queue for what I'm going to guess are heavier vehicles as well, because there's an Isuzu D-Max in front of me, and I'm quietly confident that that's not an EV, but we do have a little EV tag that we've had to hang on the mirror as well. That's fine, not really a problem. Usual quarantine check, and now we just wait to board. You will wait a while. We didn't really have anything else to do in Geelong that day, so we got in the queue early. You don't have to do that. But you may well find, as we did for both going out and coming back journeys, that other cars that turn up later than you do get boarded on first. Have patience, you'll get there in the end. And eventually it was time to actually board. And look, this is ordered, this is actually quite well done. Obviously it's something that they've done hundreds of times before. Now, at the time of year I was travelling, they were only doing evening sailings, no day sailings during the winter, because the demand just isn't there. And you board, well, here's a surprise, like any other car. And when I say like any other car, I really do mean it. For all the talk of specified EV spaces, yeah, those do not seem to exist. And I'm not sticking my nose up in the air and going, oh, they didn't give me a specified EV space. It's not about that. It's basically just you will get loaded where you get loaded. And as far as I can tell, I think what they're doing with the EV thing is much more to do with weight than anything else. It's because EVs by size of car are slightly heavier, because of course the batteries do add mass. That's why they stick you on the deck they do. As far as I can tell, at least for the two journeys that I made, you do end up on the lower deck, which may mean that you load a little bit later, but it does mean you get off a little bit faster. But here we are now, actually on board. I'm going to need something to fill my time for this long overnight journey. Whatever shall I do? Well, that will help pass a little time. Could be interesting if the waters were particularly choppy, but the reality was I actually had booked a cabin, so I actually spent most of the trip sleeping as much as was possible. For these overnight trips, I'd say if you can, budget for that, because otherwise it's not going to be that comfortable a night, but people's tolerances and budgets can, of course, vary. So what about loading off? Well, not shockingly, it's very much like getting on. Only a little bit quicker, actually, because they don't let you down until they're really just about ready to start letting cars go off. And then, once you're in Tasmania, of course, if you're in an EV, you might be thinking, well, how do I handle charging? And here, look, the good news here is that Tasmania is not that big a place. Most EVs are going to be able to get from A to B without necessarily needing to charge at all because the distances are not that great. Although in winter, of course, it can be colder. You will need to charge at some point. And here, look, there is definitely some work that needs doing. So, for example, if you're a Tesla driver and if you only want to use superchargers, bad news. At the time of recording this video, there is only one supercharger in all of Tasmania. It's at Devonport. It's where the ferry docks, more or less. I didn't actually end up using it. I'm not a big fan of giving Elon Musk any more money. But this means you will largely be using third-party charging networks. Very, very good idea to grab PlugShare, maybe a better route planner. I've found PlugShare to be a little bit better in this regard in recent times, but your mileage may vary there. And to ensure that you are actually signed up for at least the big EV networks. So the likes of EV and ChargeFox are the obvious ones. I found quite a few Explorer sites around there and a few odd little third-party ones, some of which wanted prepayment. I actually got lucky at one site I was staying at where they actually allowed me to charge from the cabin I was staying in, so I didn't actually have to use the public charger. That was nice of them. They didn't have to do that. But other places may vary. Couple of quick shout-outs. I did find Campbelltown, which has a couple of EV chargers, and it could do with more, definitely. There's a bit of peak demand there, but strategically, in terms of where it sits in Tasmania, it's quite useful to hit for hitting East Coast, for hitting West Coast, for going down to Hobart. If you need charging, I did use them for top-up. Also, because it's actually a really nice place to stop, some nice tree sculptures, and an excellent bookstore that I can't recommend highly enough. I'll also give a quick shout-out to Anva's Chocolate. I was not actually expecting to stop there. I was actually just thinking, I'll stop and get some chocolate. But they've actually got a free EV charger at the back. So I stopped and I had a coffee as well because I like supporting businesses that are going to support that kind of thing. Definitely Tasmania could use more EV charging and you do need to be prepared, but it's totally feasible to get around with really minimal fuss. I never found myself really in a spot where I was just sitting in the car waiting for it to charge. There was always pretty much something to do or something I could plan around while I charge the car, which is great. It's the ideal, really. And then, of course, the return journey. And honestly, the return journey was exactly the same thing. EV tag, check in, get on the boat, sleep overnight. Well, as much as I could. It was a much rougher crossing overnight, and obviously everyone's tolerances there can vary, but some seasickness tablets are a very smart purchase before you get on board. That's got nothing to do with EVs, however, and that was kind of the end of my journey. So, yeah, totally feasible. You do need to be a little bit prepared, but otherwise not much different to taking a regular car. Thanks for watching.